Not good for you. No, I wasn't commenting on your statue. That was a tough battle.
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated with the conversation. He dug himself out of that hole very nicely.
Thank you.
Oh, maybe you know something about that. Good for you.
So I can work all, I can party and go somewhere and
I haven't been to the shop yet. Kelly, I hear about this shop.
All the time, don't you?
this is some of the,
We were just discussing, I think we're gonna mow a little grass here. I think ultimately, and I'm sure through discussion, we'll be able to.
so right now, the whole front street right now is a disaster because it's under construction.
You should see our corner, River Road or River Road, they're doing stuff up there.
So I wrote 3 letters on the weekend to council. It took that to get the ball rolling about, because they were ignoring the council stuff. We're not going to put signs up. We're not going to do anything. It was just there was
All the businesses and stuff.
it was the OK Corral. You had front end loaders, you know, coming at cars and flagmen telling people to go when they shouldn't have gone. It was just crazy. And when I started getting people in the Camelford, and there was people from Ottawa who went through made up. I said, what's going on? We almost got hit by a front end loader. I said, hey, no. So I got on it. I started emailing people. And the council
We're
didn't
just
take
going to give it
it.
a few more minutes, so if you haven't yet grabbed a coffee or a tea or water, and we have some gluten-free
Basically
goodies,
assaulted because I was-
some non-gluten-free goodies, and a little bit of fruit. So if you wanted to help yourself to that, bring it back to the table, because we aren't going to have an intermission. We're just going to move forward into the evening. So we're going to start in just under 5 minutes. Thank you.
I already did. I had my cookie and my coffee, and I'm set.
I had that sandwich. We had dinner early and it was small.
No, it's not. Especially.
Wow, I got some.
I have changed too. It's full of change.
As we saw. We could do that intro.
We have time to think.
Oh, hello, how are you? Oh, we've actually met, I think, a couple times. You were at the party, for the primary.
Could be fair.
I'm drawing a blank.
Oh, right.
Sorry. Yes, and then I think I brought it to you once the water spread.
So everybody's had a chance to grab a goodie or coffee, tea, or water, whatever you'd like. So even though we have some stragglers, we need to sort of proceed with the evening. So wanted to thank everyone for coming out. My name is Dale Latila, and I am the chair of the Hastings, Lennox, and Addington Federal Liberal Women's Commission. But we always invite the men, so anyway. Here we go. So we wanted to introduce our panelists this evening. I'll start with Sophie, then I'll move on to Robert, and then to Catherine, and that's the order that they're going to speak in tonight. So, first of all, Sophie Koala was elected as the member of Provincial Parliament for Kingston and the Islands in 2014 and served one term. She served as the Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Children and Youth Services, Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation and Tourism, Culture and Sport. Sophie was the chair of the Cabinet Committee on Jobs and on Jobs and Economic Policy, and she was a member on the Estimates Committee, General Government, and the Legislative Assembly Committee. Wow, it sounds like she was. Okay, prior to serving as a provincial representative, Sophie served her community of Kingston and the Islands through her work as a federal MP, Ted Shoes Chief of Staff. I lived in Sterling. And prior to that, she was the office manager of Honorable Peter Milliken's constituency office. Sophie came to politics from an entrepreneurial background and spent 22 years in retail floriculture before moving overseas with her young family, where she spent 2.5 years living in Turkey and 2.5 years in France. So, welcome, Sophie.
Thank you. Professor Robert Washburn is a professor at Loyalist College, BA, BAA, and MA. Robert Washburn is an award-winning educator in the journalism program at Loyalist College, as well as a lecturer in the joint Trent University Loyalist College journalism program. As a practicing journalist for more than 35 years, he is known locally for his current affairs radio show entitled Consider This Northumberland. This program covers local politics and community life every Friday at noon on Northumberland 89.7 FM. He has worked as a reporter, columnist, and contributor to newspapers and magazines. His hyper-local news website, Consider This, and it's http / consider-this.ca, is an archive of his journalism and academic work. Professor Washburn's academic pursuits focus on hyper-local journalism in rural Canada. He has contributed to a book, written papers, and presented on various panels, all pertaining to this subject. So welcome, Robert. And finally, Catherine Coles is the manager of library services for the County of Lennox and Addington. The L&A libraries serve the communities of Amherstview, Bath, Napanee, Tamworth, and Yarker, circulating over 200,000 items and serving over 20,000 program attendees each year. Before joining L&A County in 2013, Catherine was branch services librarian for the Haliburton County Public Library. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Business from the University of Waterloo in 2009, a Master of Library and Information Science from the University of Western Ontario 2010, and is in the process of completing a Master's of Public Administration from Dalhousie University. Since 2014, she has also been the instructor of genre fiction and Readers Advisory Services for Mohawk College's Library Technicians Program. Welcome, Catherine. So that and I believe that Joanne Harrington is going to just give you a little bit of an idea of where we're headed with this topic this evening. Thank you. So I want to, on behalf of Mike Bosio, the Member of Parliament for Hastings, Lennox, and Addington electoral district, and also on behalf of our chair of our electoral district, Ellen Lemaire, and also all the members of the Women's Commission, I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening, and thank you very much our three panelists for taking time out of from busy days to be here with us this evening. Robert asked me what the Women's Commission was about, and really succinctly, it's about getting more women to run for office. And so what does that have to do with the topic for this evening, which is social media during election time? Can it ever really be trusted? Well, you might want to ask Nancy Pelosi that after what happened last week around the impact of a very powerful woman, the third most powerful politician when it comes to the role she has as Speaker of the House of Representatives in the States. You know, to have a video doctored is what is being called. To have her video doctored so that it appeared that she was slurring her speech and making very awkward hand motions. It's difficult as it is for women to raise enough money to run in order to have their credibility and their accomplishments accepted. And then now we have social media where anyone can doctor a video and then have Facebook say that it isn't their responsibility to take it off. So social media can hurt or help any gender candidate, but I think for women, I think that it has a greater impact. And even if you don't agree, see what our panelists might raise for you today about that topic. In our country, the Prime Minister was recently in Paris, as you know, for the Christchurch Summit. That was a call to action against the ugly event that happened in Christchurch this year. And there, the Prime Minister said that that social media must be safe, transparent, private, and accountable. And he is part of a growing number of world leaders who are saying that if tech and internet companies won't take an act with governments to stop the nonsense that's going on, that this government, his government, may have to step in. In December 2018, Bill C-76 was passed in Canada, and that will require online platforms such as Facebook and Google to create a registry of all digital advertisements placed by political parties or third parties during the pre-election and the election periods. And that data must remain visible to the public for 2 years. And our Privacy Commissioner for Canada, Daniel Therrien, last month concluded that Facebook had violated the privacy laws in Canada, and that was based on the Cambridge Analytica 87 million Facebook users whose data was used during the 2016 American election, and as well during Brexit. In Canada, our privacy commissioner is taking Facebook to court to force them to comply with privacy laws. So there's a lot going on in our country to try to curtail some of the activities of the big tech companies, but more likely is going to need to be done. And I think you heard that this week today. It's called I love the name of this. It's called the International Grand Committee. Finished their deliberations in Ottawa this week, and there are a number of countries that have come together to try to deal with the executives of the big tech companies to try to encourage them to apply more self-regulation, or they will end up being regulated. So as you listen to our panelists this evening, I'd like you to give a thought to how social media eases or diseases the entry of women into the political sphere as a candidate. And your takeaway as attendees this evening will be to determine what you can do as an informed voter to determine whether what you read and share is trustworthy. So with that, our first panelist is going to be Sophie Koala. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Joanne, for providing that context around the conversation that we're going to have. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is talk very specifically about the last election and some of my reflections on that election, because I think it really does feed into the conversation that you're having today. As many of you know, we did very poorly in the last election, as you all know. And there are, I think, some important reasons for that. When I was elected in 2014, we won a majority. There were certain large issues that we had to deal with in that election that, things like the gas plant, et cetera, that were all decided before the election happened. And when I went to doors and I spoke to people about their concerns, primarily the gas plant scandal. All of the leaders at that time said that they would have done the same thing. So as soon as you said that, a little bit of the wall came down from voters' faces. You could see a change, and lo and behold, we won a majority. It's much more complex, obviously, than that. But those same issues came up at the door in 2018. But in addition to that, people were very vocal about disliking the premier. And all that had happened in the interim, there are several important things that had happened in the interim. The first thing was we were elected in 2014. 2015, we had the Jian Ghomeshi case came out. We responded with the It's Never Okay action plan. And we, during the course of our time in office, that 4 years in office, we worked very hard to improve the situation for underprivileged groups, marginalized groups. So we We made it so that transgender inmates, for example, could be incarcerated by their identified gender, not their biological gender. We provided LGBTQ mental health services through children and youth services. So there was a bit of an equaling of previously marginalized groups. We knew in the 2018 election that the demographic that was problematic for us was, sorry guys, white males in between the ages of 35 and 65. And the only, are you clear? Okay, good. And you have to ask yourself though, you know, what is it that happened in between 14 and 18 that was so different, that caused us to have a majority in 14 and lose quite badly in 18? But you have to look at those, stories that happened in our communities across the province, and I think they're very important. When I went to the door in 2018, people would talk about not liking the Premier, and you would say, well, you know, what is it that you don't like about the Premier? And you would get this sort of pause, and then they would look away, and then they're thinking of something, and then they would come back and they talk about the gas scandals. Well, that happened in 2013, it wasn't our administration. What else is there? And they would think of something else that was entirely not relevant. And so something was happening on a very broad level. There was information and communication that was out there that was getting into people's minds, but they couldn't articulate it at the door. They knew they didn't like her, but they didn't know why. You know, there were occasions, obviously, when they had certain things, and certain people did have some things to say that were obviously legitimate concerns to those individuals. But by and large, there were people that even, you know, educated people that I absolutely respect, that I consider to be very current in what's happening in society, very knowledgeable about the political matters of the day, who did the same thing. And I thought, what, really? So you have to then take that, peel back from that, and really try to analyze what it was that was causing this issue. And my theory is that part of it was this toxic, absolutely toxic social media that's out there, but also that people really didn't, they weren't thinking about what they were hearing. They weren't analyzing. It wasn't evidence-based. It was emotional impact that people were responding to. They were hearing these nasty sound bites, and they were, you know, thinking, oh, okay, well, no, of course I don't like Kathleen. So I think that, you know, with respect to social media, for women politicians, it is difficult, I know that. But we were just chatting a little bit about that, and I didn't actually have that many problems on social media. When I first started, as you heard, in my political career, I worked for Peter Milliken, who was the Speaker of the House. It was our responsibility we were always in opposition during that time. I know that you should never assume you're always going to be in power. You should always assume that you will need to work with your colleagues. You should always treat people respectfully, and that was how I did my work. That was what was important to me, and that was a priority in every single communication that I ever put out. So I was very meticulous about my social media. The downside to that was that it took a lot of time away from my job. I'm a chronic workaholic and insomniac, and so, you know, I literally would work in between 16 and 20 hours a day, most days, for not just that 4-year period, but the 7 years that I was working on the federal side as well. So you have to, you know, I don't believe that we can afford as society to not pay attention to that dialogue that's out there. You know, when we are attacked on social media, we need to respond, in my opinion, respectfully. If you can get a little joke in there that will lighten the tone, do so. But every single time you put something out, you have to envision your worst critics and what they will say, and you know, don't try and antagonize people. You need to be able to deliver a message, but you need to do it carefully. And if you get attacked, you need to be very careful how you respond. Sometimes it's not worth responding. There are lots of ways that you can you know, check yourself before making a post, before responding to something. You need to make sure that you know, have a look at the person who's posting. Do they have, you know, how many friends or contacts do they have? Sometimes it's only 10 or, you know, 20 or 50. So are you going to respond to that? As soon as you respond to that, you are elevating that individual's point of view to a level that probably shouldn't be warranted. So it's really, it's an ongoing battle. You know, it's something that we're stuck with it, for better or for worse. And I think that it can be a positive tool. I think that, you know, you can, there are ways to manage it, but it takes a lot of energy in that line of work. So I'll just leave, one last thing. When you're elected, because this pertains to what you were saying about the mission of the Women's Commission, when you're elected, provincially, you have an introductory session on how the protocol around legislative assembly activities, what you can say, what you can't say, and this is put on by the clerk of the House. It's very interesting. And they give you a full briefing, what your day is going to look like, where you can sit, you have to bow, if you cross the mace, and all these little funny rules. At the end of the session, when the writ has been dropped, the Legislative Assembly Service, which provided that training in the beginning, called all of the new members back who took that introductory course and said, you know, we would love for you as new members to come back and to talk to us about what your experience was like, and to give us any guidance on what we can do better in order to prepare the next round of MPPs coming into the Legislative Assembly to make their lives easier. So I was over the moon excited. I, you know, wrote out all kinds of things, you know, about what it was like going in, what I felt that they should include, and how I felt that it was important that if they provided a service in particular to women, to just make sure they're doing okay, because it's tough in there. Women, you know, we as women and as mothers, we're cultured to be looking after people and to be making sure that everybody's okay. And, you know, mothering doesn't always stop when you're in your profession. It doesn't mean that you don't have a professional side and you can't engage in other activities, obviously, but you absolutely, you know, I don't feel great if somebody is hypercritical of me or toxic towards me in the house, which didn't happen because I don't give that out either, I'm probably not gonna want to go out for coffee together with that person. You just don't do that. You treat people respectfully. So, I think that it's really important that in everything that we do, that we maintain that civility. The decline in civil discourse is rampant. So when I came together with that panel, and was excited to share what I had to say about the necessity to help women and to check in on them, to see if or all new members, to see how they're doing, if they have concerns, if the toxicity in the house is becoming a bit much, what are some coping mechanisms, etc. And I thought it would be great to see all of the former first-time MPPs in that session. I was the only one there.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The only one there of all parties. Yeah. So, we've got a lot of work to do. I'm currently involved in putting on a panel discussion in Kingston in the fall on the decline of civil discourse and its effect on democracy. Since I have started working on that, the Association of Former Parliamentarians has had a discussion in Hamilton with their group on the same subject. And following that, the Lieutenant Governor has put out a whole exhibition in her suite in Queen's Park on the declining state of democracy. Everywhere I go, there is somebody else who's putting on an event about this subject. It is really important. It has a profound impact on our communities across Ontario, across Canada, across the world. We're seeing it in many different places in the world. This rise in populism, and we have to get it back, and we can get it back. It's conversations like this that will bring it back. We need to insist that we have to deal with each other respectfully. So that's my rant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you want to do questions now, or we'll do?
I think we'll do them all at the end. Yeah.
It's tough to follow. I'm not going to wing it. I came with prepared remarks. Tom Rosenstyle, the infamous journalist and academic, said, "Misinformation is not like a plumbing problem you fix. It's a social condition like crime that you must constantly monitor and adjust to." In 2017, the BBC Future Now program interviewed a panel of 50 experts about the challenges facing us in the 21st century. Many concluded the breakdown of trusted information sources as a significant hurdle. A recent article by Kevin Kelly, the co-founder of Wired magazine, a longtime source of technology news and information, wrote, "Truth is no longer dictated by authorities, but is networked by peers. For every fact, there is a counterfact, and all these counterfacts and facts look identical online, which is confusing to most people." As a journalist, academic, and a passionate supporter of local and hyperlocal news, my presentation is going to look through a particular lens that I am most familiar with and where I can shed the most light. A recent study done by the Pew Center of 1,116 respondents found some impressive results. First, the fake news ecosystem preys on some of our deepest human emotions. This means manipulative actors will use new digital tools to target our innate preferences for comfort and convenience, and our craving to receive reinforcing messages to our real values within echo chambers. Second thing they found was that our brains are not wired to content with the pace of technological change. The potential for mass deception and gigantic information scams will be possible because large numbers of the public will simply give up and lose interest in civic life. And the final thing was, this comes down to human nature. Or more simply put, the concern that drives events like this one will win the day. Yes, there will be some technical alternatives, some apps or platforms to rein in fake news and disinformation. But it will be up to us as individuals to become more digitally literate and develop better information literacy skills to raise the tone of discourse eventually. None of this is straightforward, but I believe events like tonight and others' efforts are really important steps in this journey. As someone who read the Cloutier Manifesto in 1999 and its 95 theses, heralding the internet as brimming with potential, as a more fabulous tool of democracy and a cauldron of innovation and creativity to be shared with the world, I was instantly baptized as a techno-utopian. I would describe myself and the internet today in quite different terms, saying my current experience of being online, especially on social media, as similar to swimming in a septic tank. But don't let that turn you off. While it sounds cynical, in fact, I remain steadfast in my feeling that there is hope and reason to keep aspiring to use these products and services to work towards those ideals held so long ago. So let's try to tease out some of the challenges that we see and where it takes us. To begin, let's try to get general understanding of some of the terminology, and I'm afraid I'm going to mow some of my colleagues' grass here, and I apologize in advance. Hopefully, she'll do a far better job. Let's try to get some understanding of some of these terms.
For the audience.
Yes.
Misinformation, disinformation, and fake news, because they get tossed around quite a bit in discussions like this. So first, in straightforward terms, let's just say misinformation is an innocent mistake of sharing incorrect or false information. In other words, it's an error of fact and is not malicious or intentional. Disinformation is quite the opposite of misinformation. It is deliberate or calculated effort to communicate false, erroneous, or misleading information with the intent to do harm. Fake news is actually a historic term meant to describe disinformation in the form of news, but it has taken on a different meaning in the past 3 years as the term has been used to undermine the credibility of news organizations and create mistrust of valid, traditional, reliable information providers. And I would say this, that it's not just south of the border that this is happening. It is happening not only in our country, in our province, but even at the most local level. And I can share with you a very quick story. Every summer I work for the local newspaper before it closed, and I went down 2 years ago into a church basement to interview a very lovely old woman who was doing a bazaar, and I went to talk to her, and she said, "I don't want to talk to you, you're fake news." And I thought, wow, at 80 years old, how do you know what that means? But she said that, and it was quite disarming. The purpose of all of this is to create tension between facts and counterfacts, and in some cases, wholly false or wrong information, to create confusion and neutralize or dissuade the public from being empowered. It would be wrong to view this just as a supply problem. In other words, only to point fingers at all the organizations that create the disinformation. And I think that's one of the things we need to be especially aware of as we watch the commission that was mentioned earlier, because we can all sit there and go, bad, bad Facebook. But it's not just Facebook, it's us as well, as individuals. Rather, it is a demand problem. How is it that we are so ready to believe things that are so, at least on the surface, untrue? And one of the famous stories that gets given in this case is during the 2016 election, where the story got floated that the Pope had endorsed Trump. Well, we laughed. 10 million people shared that and thought it was true. Surveys were done. 10 million. And how does it get through to anybody that the Pope is non-political? He doesn't ever endorse anybody. Common sense, but it happens. How does that happen? I want to be there's lots of reasons for that, and that's a lecture for another time. But I want to be absolutely clear. I'm not saying for a moment that organizations like Ontario Proud, Canada Proud, Press Progress, or any of the countless other well-funded groups across the political spectrum that spew out garbage get off. But it is also wrong to place the blame at their feet as well. We do have agency. And it truly comes back to our own lack of sophistication, both in terms of media literacy and of technology. It comes down to the simple fact that we don't know how to deal in an environment where there are wild accusations, hair-raising disinformation, and the civility gloves are off. So you post something or comment on something, and it is like a tsunami of vitriol gets unleashed. What is more stunning is that we tend to believe these various groups and individuals over other authoritative sources, or even our own common sense. To be quite honest, it says more about those people than it does about the Russians or any other of our political actors. What is even more stunning are the techniques and strategies being used. Yes, false news stories are one method, but there are also efforts to depress voter turnout through distributing false dates, times, and locations, or the endless stream of memes as triggers to remind people why they dislike a particular politician or controversial issue, all in the name of making the recipients angry. I had coffee with a local activist in my community on the Victoria Day Monday, and we were talking about this, and he has a folder on his desktop, and he keeps these memes, and he uses them, puts them up on Facebook. And I said, why do you do that? And he said, well, I want to respond to the other side. And I said, okay, but from their perspective, you're just spreading disinformation. How are you helping the discourse? And he got all muddled. But I mean, it doesn't just happen at the highest levels. It happens at a very local level, and he was a good example. Let us not forget that all of this is aimed at making people feel alienated, disempowered, or not affiliated with the system. And in Canada right now, there are a lot of people who are already feeling at some level like this. We can point to Indigenous people, seniors, struggling families, farmers, the unemployed, the underemployed, young people, and so forth. I would argue those living in rural constituencies would feel this even more, since the levels of service are not always as high or as equally accessible. The message is clear. Don't participate, be angry, and also hate your neighbor and distrust everyone. And if you get pounded with that enough, that's the way you begin to believe things are. At the heart of this is a business model. And you may have heard of the attention economy or the surveillance capitalism. And these are ideas that we use devices, products, and services. They are free and convenient, and somebody else is making money while we provide our private data for others to use and profit by. Therefore, what is known as the casino effect, where these devices, products, and services are filled with notifications or other methods which constantly beckon us onto our devices at all the time. And when you get on, some tools try very, very, very hard to keep you on, endlessly flipping between items until we forget about time. And I'm sure we've all done this with the Facebook, and it's only 15 minutes, 20 minutes has gone by. Then an algorithm tracks our behavior and feeds us more to keep us using. All of this is baked into the products and services. So what do we do, or what can we do? I have a couple of suggestions that are a little bit outside the box. First, I'd like to suggest that we bring the humanity into the equation. It is through human contact where we form relationships. The more we interact, the more opportunities we have to build trust, credibility, and civility that is so lacking in social media, the better chance I think we stand. I feel with my students that when I post anything to the learning software or send an email or post to our Facebook group for the class, there is little or no response. When I talk to them, especially individually, my results in terms of participation or taking action is exponentially increased. Listening is so important. We all know this, but we have to do even more of it with each and other in this environment. And I was thinking when you were talking about knocking on doors and talking to people, how important it is that we just don't talk, but we listen as well. And breaking down those barriers is really important, because the social media wants to put up those walls. And we're angry because we feel disenfranchised and disassociated. And breaking that down, I think, is going to take more time and more energy on the campaign trail and through all of the actions that we take in our community. The second thing is countermeasures on a local scale. Much of the damaging information comes from above the local fray. In other words, most of which impacts us locally is not generated here, but created higher up the food chain. It is simply shared or redistributed through various channels within social media. While entering into a full-blown fight with opponents may not be a great strategy, at least monitoring the environment and offering a carefully considered tactical response may not be a bad idea at the local level. I think you talked a bit about this. Especially if those responding are local. It can sometimes be a different thing when someone you know responds to a post than an anonymous individual. I would never respond to Canada Proud or to Press Progress. They may not be as quick to eviscerate or spew venom as a national group where the majority of players are faceless. And as a rule, never engage with anyone who does not use their real name. The final thing, and the one I feel most strongly about, is to support local news. Encourage local news organizations to focus on reporting, not commentary. By this I mean the creation of news stories where principles, practices, and the ethics of journalism are used. Remembering that reporting, the main function of any good news organization, should be fair, balanced, unbiased, accurate, and verified information. Ask for analysis rather than opinion. That means explainers and fact-checking rather than telling the audience what to think. In other words, help the audience grow in knowledge. That should be the mandate of local news. I urge everyone to find ways to support and strengthen local news. Instead of turning away out of frustration and out of frustration and distrust. The reason I urge this is when journalism is practiced as reporting and analysis, it can be a strong seltzer to the indigestible overindulgence of waves of disinformation we face daily. Not only do journalists have principles, practices, and ethics, but we also have systems whereby our information is edited, reviewed, tested, and challenged before it's distributed. And when we make mistakes, where we are required to make public corrections and clarifications. Now, before anybody has a heart attack and shares a story about how a newsroom screwed up an account or bludgeoned me with accusation of media bias, let me make a few quick points. First, when it comes to errors, I acknowledge quickly that we are human and we make mistakes. And we correct our mistakes very publicly. But this is misinformation, not disinformation. And there are plenty of times journalists have gotten it wrong, and in some cases very wrong. But what I will say is this is done without malice or intent to harm. And I think you will meet very few journalists who do not have a powerful sense of public service, whereas the disinformation distributed by others is a deliberate attempt to undermine. And I think that if we support local and hyper-local news, that what you'll find is we can start pointing to it as a place to go where you can get good, solid information. As for bias, I draw your attention, As for bias, I draw a very strong distinction already between reporting and commentary. Sadly, commentary is often not clearly identified by news organizations and gets mistaken for reporting. 20 or 30 years ago, you would only find commentary on the editorial pages of a newspaper and rarely on radio or television. Today, there's talk radio, there are expert panels on TV news everywhere. I would say serious news organizations should get rid of the entire lot. Throw them out. Let them go build a website or a podcast or a YouTube channel and let reporting reign. And on that note, I end my comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm not a politician or a lecturer, so I apologize in advance that my public speaking skills are not up to par. But that being said, I'm happy to be here. I'm always happy to represent the library in discussions about literacy in all forms, including digital literacy, which is what we're speaking about tonight. You already covered the definition for misinformation and disinformation, so I'm going to talk a bit about some of the forms of mis and disinformation and how to detect them. So the first one, and also I'm moving from least harmful to most harmful. So satire and parody is the first one. It's misinformation. It's not intended to cause harm, but it still fools people. And in the wrong circles, parody can inflame. And that's especially because the subject matter is often relating to political or social issues. So you're probably all familiar with the Beaverton or the Onion, right? So these aren't technically fake news because they are transparently satire. However, people still fall for their stories all the time. And they will share their outrage on social media, and it takes on a life of its own. So I have some visual aids here that I will pass around as well. And before I show this one, don't be alarmed, it's a dog with ham on its face. Does anybody recognize this one? So this went viral in 2015. It says, this dog saved his family in a fire, and for every share on Facebook, Facebook will donate $1 to get the dog's face fixed. So it's ridiculous. It was obviously intended originally as a joke, but it was eventually shared hundreds of thousands of times. So it just goes to show you how parody can be taken out of hand. Another example I have here is this very recent one. Anybody familiar with this? So it originated at the Babylon Bee, which is a parody site comparable to The Onion. And it says that AOC appears on The Price is Right and guesses that everything is free, which is kind of funny, but obviously it's so clearly untrue. But this was shared around so many times that Snopes, the fact-checking website, had to issue a statement about it. So the takeaway here is that not everybody gets jokes, and if you don't have a sense of humor maybe, you should look into the source before sharing it. I'd also suggest the website mediabiasfactcheck.com, and it'll tell you the level of bias for pretty much every like larger news source out there. If you search a source, it'll also tell you if it's satire. So it's a good thing to check, to save yourself some embarrassment. So the second thing we'll be talking about is the false connection. So that's when headlines, captions, or photos do not actually fit the content presented. So this is otherwise known as clickbait, and it's usually employed when there are economic incentives involved, with the writer or the website wanting you to click through so they can get your money. So look out for captions like you'll never believe this, or 5 shocking things about this. And I have an example of that too, this. So it says, I seriously can't believe what I just saw, this is unreal. When you find out what these kids are jumping into, your jaw will drop. And they're jumping into a swimming pool if you actually click through. So it's not very shocking at all. And I guess maybe the article wasn't interesting enough to hold its own, so that's how they get you to click on it. And it's not necessarily saying that the content on the other side of the click is invalid. It's just, it's a bit of a manipulative practice. Photos can also be used to manipulate the message people receive without clicking. So, and Facebook has curbed this a little bit, but a year ago, you could share a link, and then you could change the photo that displayed in that link. And now you can't do that, thankfully, but you could see how that could manipulate the message without people even having clicked through. Misleading content is another one. An example, okay, so misleading content is using information to improperly frame an issue or an individual. And I have this here. So this link, it's actually to an article that was put out by the Telegraph several years ago, and it says gas tanks and Arabic documents found in unmarked car by Paris Notre Dame Cathedral, whatever. But anyways, it was posted the day of the cathedral fire. Obviously, it was intended to, to stir up some racial tension. Most people won't click the link to find out it's 3 years old. They just immediately assume. So the takeaway from this takeaway from that is if you're going to share something, you should actually click through and read the article before you share it. There's also false content, and that's when genuine content is shared with false contextual information. There's imposter content, so that's when genuine news sources are impersonated. So fake news creators may use a website that is just like a subtle variation on the original, with the URL that's a subtle variation on the original. So like the one example I have here, CNNRussia.ru. It's a CNN impersonation, and it's been shut down, but you know, it was there for a while. And this is also a strategy used by scammers in order to get your banking information, like through email, that sort of thing. It's the same kind of idea. So if you're ever unsure whether a website is legitimate, the easiest thing to do is Google the original, and the original will be the first entry on Google, presumably, and then you can compare URLs from there. Manipulated content, that's when genuine information or imagery is manipulated to deceive, and this is where the Nancy Pelosi example fits in. I understand that video actually originated at the Fox Business Channel, which is kind of crazy. So this is hard to detect because normally we assume that seeing is believing, but you know, technology has gotten to the point where a creator of a video or a visual, they can have you see whatever they want you to see. So I would suggest that you look into additional sources before sharing a visual that could be particularly inflammatory or used to manipulate opinion in some way. Then there's fabricated content, and that's the worst stuff. And it's your 100% nonsense, entirely false, designed to deceive, and unlike parody, it's designed to be harmful. And I think a pretty good example of this is InfoWars and Alex Jones. If any of you are familiar with him, he was the Sandy Hook is a hoax guy. The HIV was created by the government guy. So he's been since banned by Facebook, and users cannot share links to InfoWars. But he still influences a pile of people who do share information on Facebook. So he hasn't entirely disappeared, unfortunately. So now I'm going to talk a bit about how to combat mis and disinformation. And my first point is to read widely. To get a complete understanding of an issue, it's important to read information from many points of view, including from news and sources that you may not agree with. Also, become more comfortable with ambiguity. So you may read a news story or something that challenges your opinion on an issue or your previous idea on how to approach a problem. But it is okay for information to inform rather to just reinforce your existing point of view. In a similar vein, if there is a news story you come across on Facebook, for example, that really makes you angry and fires you up, or conversely makes you feel really smug, then you're going to want to consider why that is and take a second look. Like why is it giving me this emotional response? And I guess really question whether the piece is deliberately trying to inflame, because your best sources for information, as has already been said, they're going to be neutral and more or less let the facts speak for themselves. If you haven't read a news article with a critical eye, best not to share it. It's pretty obvious. So yes, a lot of misinformation, disinformation comes from fake accounts or bots, but it's shared by real people. So you need to read closely and constantly question what you see, and ask yourself in any situation where you have a piece of information, You know, what is its purpose? Is it meant to inform or to sell you something, or to entertain, or to persuade? And who stands to benefit from the information? And if you're unsure of the validity, then just don't share it with others. Fake news is real, and it doesn't affect just one side of the political spectrum, nor does it originate from just one side of the political spectrum. And I have this graph here, and I included this in an email with notes as well, so you may receive it. But it's a media bias chart, and I apologize. It's an American thing. I didn't create it. So you have here from top to bottom, original fact reporting, and then you go into complex analysis, all the way down to complete nonsense fabrication. Then you have the scale from left to right, and as you can see, there are some legitimate sources that kind of skew left and kind of skew right, but what you're not going to find are legitimate sources that are way left or way right. Yeah, so I'll pass this around, but my recommendation would be to, if you're going to share something, it's probably best to stick within the green box or the yellow box. The green rectangle is news, and the yellow rectangle is for fair interpretations of the news.
Can I just say that Catherine did provide me electronically with 2 handouts. So if you have given, if you've given us tonight your email address, then I commit to forwarding those 2 attachments to you.
And on one of the handouts as well is the link to this website I already talked about, the Media Bias Fact Check. And I just printed out an example of one of the entries. So this one is for the Toronto Star. Yeah, so it'll tell you on a scale, it's bias. It'll tell you the factual reporting level. It'll tell you the country of origin. It'll tell you who owns it, which is important. And it also has the World Press Freedom Rank for the country it originates from, and it's international, right? And then it has a little bit of commentary on, the kind of reporting that is provided by that source. Pass that around. Critical thinking must also be applied to the evaluation of sources. So the evaluation sources, but also how you come across the sources. So search engines like Google, they use relevancy ranking algorithms to determine what sources are among the top results in a search. And their algorithms are proprietary and they're unknown to us. But we do know that advertisements are high up, and we know that your top results will be influenced by your location and by your browsing history. So again, kind of talking about the personal echo chamber. Similarly, Facebook has been criticized for creating these filter bubbles and presenting the user with content that already supports their existing points of view. And it's pretty clear how this kind of practice creates these hyper-partisan stances. And obviously Facebook there's been minor crackdowns on fake news, but so far they haven't really committed to outright removing anything. So it is still the Wild West out there, and it should be treated as such. Fact-checking websites, which I already kind of talked about, factcheck.org and Snopes, and the FactScan is a good one for Canada, and then the one that I mentioned there. Keep in mind, though, that there are partisan fact-checking websites, which I would think entirely defeats the purpose, but they're out there. Finally, the library plug. We're always happy to help you determine whether information is legitimate or illegitimate, so feel free to drop by any of our branches or send me an email. My contact information is on one of those handouts I talked about. And yeah, thank you very much, and I'm happy to continue the discussion.
I just ask you, Catherine, are these available, copies of these two?
The
For us?
photos?
Yes.
No, not the
This-
photos,
this one. This,
the media.
Oh, yeah, that's in the email.
is it?
Yeah.
And this
Oh,
one
good.
too, the Toronto Star one?
No,
No.
those are just screen caps, but I can make them available.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Okay. I like this one. You have one?
But you want this one?
No.
Oh,
Just
this
the other
one.
one, for sure the other one. Both of them. Both of
I
one.
just wanted to, Professor Wasberg, just thinking back a number of years at what a marvelous newspaper the Kingston Whig was, and what a pitiful rag it is now.
Don't hold back, Irene.
Tell us how you really feel.
Yes, but I do get the paper every morning, I just wanna be sure that my obituary is not in there.
There's a lot of newspapers that you could, the Intelligencer, it's good for wrapping fish, you know, like,
Well, I'll say, can I speak to that for
Yeah.
just a second? Loyalist College is involved in what we call the Local News Initiative. And we've been working within the Belleville community with our students to support and strengthen local news. We started that project 2 years ago. And what we've done is we've held public forums where people come and tell us, with the students fully engaged, as to where they think there's a lack of coverage. So comments like we just heard are quite frequent, wouldn't wrap dead fish, and I totally understand. The students then take that, they create their own mandate for the school year, and then each week we evaluate ourselves against those goals and objectives, plus we create a mission statement for the newsroom for that year. We've done that 2 years in a row now, and from the students' perspective, what we find they're going out and doing is trying to find the gaps in the holes and to fill those in. So that's one model that we've done. The other thing that we've done through this project is work that I've done around in Northumberland. And you might have heard the term news desert. So places like Tweed and some Sterling and other places used to have more than one paper. Now
awesome
they have none.
papers. I know.
Yeah, they have none. That's
The
called a
reprint
news.
of the Intel.
That's right.
Yeah.
Those were called news deserts. Our research is now showing that there are 3 levels to that. There's the news desert where there's nothing. There's what we call news impoverished, which it has media, but nobody's functioning properly, and it's not sustainable what they're doing. And therefore, the community's being ill-served. And the final one is news fragile, which is, we consider Belleville to be an example of where people are making money, it is sustainable, but there's so much journalism that's not taking place. So my project in Northumberland has been to strengthen. So we met with the community after the closure of Northumberland Today, which was the former Cobourg Daily Star, which has existed for 176 years and in 30 seconds was closed down when they did the swap. The community was outraged. We held a meeting. People came, 250 people packed into a room to express their outrage. We talked about what could be done. We created something called the Northumberland Hub, which was a news distribution system, and we've done a number of other things. But our objective is to work with the community to strengthen the coverage so that people don't say what was just got said, which was that we had this great paper and now it's garbage. There's a lot of factors that go into that, and a lot of them are hard to overcome. But what we believe, and I believe this absolutely passionately, is that we can't walk away from this for the very reason that we heard from the candidate. I mean, to get the right information out. When the local newspaper in Northumberland, during the provincial election, didn't even publish the candidate profiles. Didn't even publish them, they put them online, but they missed the weekly deadline in the hard copy. I mean, that blows my mind. But if we walk away, then we're really screwed, because the disinformation, it's just going to come out in droves, and it's not that local people are going to do it. It's just people, re-click, share, and the stuff, you just can't believe it. So the only solution I see on a local level is to strengthen local news, and I think that those kinds of discussions and those kinds of things have to come from somewhere. And groups like this that are community leaders, people who are activists, need to stand up and say, come on, paper, you can do better than this. You have to do better than this. You know, you can't just keep posting press releases or rewriting the crime stuff from the cops. There's more out there, and you've got to make a commitment. And there's things that can be done. One of the things that I've been encouraging people to say is, you know, let's have a thing where businesses and people can donate, and let's hire another reporter so that the money stays in the community, so that it doesn't go back up to Post Media or to Metroland in Toronto. And to have the local franchisees put their foots down and say, look, we don't want just somebody in Toronto in a glass tower to say, let's go with Facebook because it's the best way to advertise. Let the local people say, we want to sponsor our journalism because we care about our community. The same way that they support a local hockey team or the Girl Guides. Anyway, there's my rant.
Yeah,
So-
right. The Sterling paper lost probably the best reporter I'd ever had to deal with, and she literally saved our library, but now who knows how it's gonna go. But when we were in a real pickle, it was the local paper that got people out to our meetings, and we went from meetings that had our board to meetings that had 40 people sitting in the room saying, what the hell are you doing with my library? You know, so, and then they fired the CEO and blah, 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 and now everybody's lost interest. Now they're losing their inner book, whatever, and I'm glad I don't.
And it's,
consider it
it's
anymore.
even worse,
It's
some of
awful.
these groups that raise money, I've talked to people who 50% lower participation rates, donors, drop by 50% because they can't get their message out that we're raising money for a good cause.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's true, you know, for any of the small towns you mentioned, Tweed, Madoc, Sterling, especially when you look at municipal meetings, council meetings, where there used to be a reporter all the time at those reporting exactly what council was doing. Now there's nothing.
Yeah.
And people, unless they go to the meetings, have no knowledge of what actually is happening at those meetings.
Do they post online?
No.
And even then.
Even then, people don't really go to the websites because they're really hard to get around, maneuver around. And most people don't go there.
You know, the owners, there's a concentration.
Can't hear you, Eileen.
I said, there's a concentration with the newspaper. I don't know that's all there is. There's no doubt that there's bias. And it has to do with money, it has to do with the change, it has to do with all of the things that are affecting us. Everything's tied.
But remember, I drew a really clear line, and I want to emphasize this because I think this is critical.
Yeah.
There's commentary. I think it's time that community leaders stood up and said, we're done with commentary. I was a columnist for close to 20 years. I stopped being a columnist because I started to realize, you know, what am I doing? I'm blowing in the wind, I'm not contributing. I went back to being a journalist and just reporting. We need to get rid of the columnists. Enough with opinion. We don't need editorial cartoons. Just send people to the meetings, right? And then the commentary, just go get a website. 3 clicks, you can have one. Go make a living out of it if you're so good. But let's get back to the journalistic fundamentals of and the principles, practices, and ethics of journalism, like we teach at Loyalist. That's what I think is critical. And if you got an opinion, great. There's a gajillion other people. Fine, go off. God bless you. But let's get news back to being news. Factual information, verified, accurate information, so people can start to make decisions on their own. We don't need to tell people how to think. They're smart out there. They're good people. Not my job. My job is to put it out there.
The question you made about having a reporter or yourself going to a council meeting and reporting, but then how do you then find a newspaper that will actually take that report and actually report on the findings that you put out there? Because I found that talking to some of the retired local reporters, they might go out and have an article ready about local events or something that they think very, very important, then to try to convince the editor to take it, they might go, don't want it. It's not interesting to me.
I don't want to Shanghai this thing, because but that's the kind of work that we're doing with the local initiative. is looking at alternative models. How do we set up independence? How do we set up alternatives to the big corporations? The reason I reinvented myself as a journalist, going from print, which I've done for umpteen jillion years, to now radio, is because I couldn't get paid because none of the papers, the Metroland guys, they wouldn't pay me for my time and my effort. So I said, okay, if I'm gonna give it for free, I'll go to the community radio station, do something that I feel has integrity, and bite me, other guys. So, but I think there's other things that can be done, and there's models out there, and I think that's the kind of thing why Loyalist is so committed to this, is that I think there are alternatives. In the same way that it's 3 clicks to get a columnist to go away, 3 clicks you can build a news website, and where do you go from there? And what are the possibilities, and what are the models that work? And I think what you're seeing is lots of communities are doing that now. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So, but I appreciate the conversation very, very much.
I have a question. So right now at the federal level, the government is looking to make an investment into media to ensure that we're not skewing into this fake news, if you will, society online, and that local news is supported. But in that process, people are feeling that it's very politicized because it's the Liberal government giving money. They've made efforts to set up a panel so that it's an arm's length process, but it still is something that's being talked about and politicized. So I'm wondering if you had suggestions on how to depoliticize support for media when it's something that it's an investment that needs to be made in order to keep Canadians educated about what's happening.
My colleague and I went to Ottawa and spoke to bureaucrats within the Heritage Ministry when this was first announced, and we made a very passionate argument to address the issue of news deserts, news poverty, and news fragility. We also, though, I would just turn you to a report called The Shattered Mirror. That report, if you haven't read it, you should read it. There's a series of recommendations at the end of it, which I don't know why the government, after they commissioned this, isn't following those recommendations. I think what they're doing right now is trying to cater to Torstar and Postmedia and the other media giants, and they're trying to find a way to make it easy for them, whereas it's hard work what they need to do. So go to that report, look at the recommendations in there, they all make sense, and it would be good investment. And I also think that local news, hyper-local news, for hamlets and villages and towns needs to be supported. And it's not going to be through Metroland, because Metroland's only interested in distributing their flyers. Postmedia is only interested in trying to do whatever the hell they do. What I think is really important, though, is that there's lots of entrepreneurs, lots of people. We teach entrepreneurship to our students. We encourage them to go out and start things, start news organizations. So, I know lots and lots of people through my work on a hyper-local that could use $50,000, $100,000, and they'd be set to go, and they're independent, and they're local, and they care about the community, and stuff like that. Yeah, absolutely. Does that help?
Is there more or less interest in journalism now?
Sadly, there's less. I mean, when you're called the enemy of the people, and there isn't a politician on the planet that just doesn't delight in the moment you do something that they don't agree with, fake news, you're the enemy, you're biased.
I was intrigued to come here for a couple of reasons, but I'm glad I heard some things and a couple of questions about changing the paradigm of how to get good information out there. I'll mention a couple of things. One is, I'm from Stone Mills. We have a Stone Mills Taxpayer Forum on Facebook. Great way to share good information. We have somebody volunteer, several volunteers, who go to the township meetings. They report on them. They also put it online for all of our members, which are almost 1,000 now. Start small, it'll grow. The mediators or the moderators cut people off real quick if you start getting personal or stupid. And I mean stupid by being stupid. Getting it personal. Don't get personal. Deal with the facts. So it's growing. It needs to be supported. The more members, the better off we're going to be. No paper. We don't need paper. These are all very interested people who are members of this thing, who are all engaged, who all have something to say, and who just as likely will show up at a council meeting if there's an issue. Marvelous. We mentioned Snopes, whatever you want to call that, the fact-checking operations. Most of them are free. They don't charge you. They look for donations. Support them. $10, even $10 a year will help them stay alive and do the fact-checking on our behalf. That's all you need to do. It doesn't take very much. It doesn't mean you have to give up your job or take away from your recreational activities. Just $10. A couple of cups of coffee or water will do the fine job. I was struck some years ago by an article that I read about fake news, false news, lies, prevarications, alternative facts, and all the rest of it before it all became constant. All great lies have some elements of truth in them.
Yep.
Our job as human beings, reading or listening or watching this stuff, is to find where the truth is in this whole thing. Now, that's all very positive stuff, and we can all do it. We're all fairly bright people, and we can all manage this kind of thing. However, we're not everybody. There's a lot of people out there who prefer whatever bad, dark, bloody stuff is going on, and they're the ones who will push it. I was particularly interested in coming here because I have quite a number of Facebook friends who have Facebook friends who have Facebook friends who make commentary about certain things, and I'm getting really tired of these little GIFs and memes and all the rest of it that are slamming people. I don't care who they're slamming. They gotta stop. So I take it upon myself to give them shit. Stop it. I don't like that. If you don't stop it, I'll unfriend you. Right? Just stop it. It doesn't help. It doesn't create anything positive, those things. Right? The thing that got me really riled up, and I don't know why, was a couple of memes about our friend Dougie Ford. They were wrong, they were false. They didn't properly represent what this guy is really about. And we can all say something nasty about him, but he isn't necessarily a nasty guy. He was elected. He's got a majority. He's got a job to do. He doesn't know what he's doing, but he's got a job to do. So he needs help. What's wrong with helping him if it's to our advantage? I don't have to be a liberal. I don't have to be a conservative. I don't have to be a Green or an NDP. He's the government. He represents the government. So let's make his job a little better for my benefit. And that's the only kind of political thing I've got around here. Why not? Right? He's not my enemy. He's my premier. Darrell Cramp is my MPP. Nothing I can do about that until the next election. So, in the meantime, whenever he allows me into his office, I'll go and talk to him. And that's the other trick, face to face. So that's my little rah-rah in this whole thing. I was really intrigued with, coming from a journalist background, libraries. People show up at libraries because you count how many people show up and use your services. That justifies your existence.
But here, the thing is that I was going to go next because of the library, and I think that most people don't know all the services that can be provided, that are provided at our neighborhood libraries. And,
Yeah.
you know, like really, I'm going to go and learn how to use my little tablet one of these days at the library. Exactly, so thank you so much, all of you, for good stuff, yes. So this, the shattered mirror, where would you find that?
Library.
Ask the library. No, you just type in shattered mirror and news, and it'll pop up, and it's a
Okay.
downloadable file.
Okay.
What's the Canadian equivalent of Snopes?
A couple of good things to say. Toronto Star has taken on a couple of new policies. One is they now identify opinion very clearly from everything else. They're doing that on a regular basis. Also, they've just made a pledge 2 weeks ago, public pledge, that they're going to have more explainers, which is the analysis I talked about, and they're going to have fact-checking team for the entire election. So I think those are both
Well,
good.
they sent what's his name down to the States to fact check Trump.
Yep. Daniel Dale.
They can bring
Can I
him
also,
back.
just to
No,
add to
Dale-
the
Daniel
tools,
Dale did.
there's a piece of software, if you use the Chrome browser on your desktop, there's one called Owl Factor.
Who?
And Owl Factor is a little icon, it's a free extension, Owl Factor, OWL Factor, F-A-C-T-O-R. And if you put that into your, all you do is when an article comes up, you click on the icon, you gotta wait about 30 seconds to a minute, it will do an analysis, it will tell you the leaning of the news organization, and it will do an analysis. It'll look at everything from the number of sources it has, the types of sources, how credible it is, and it'll give you an instant analysis of that article.
Is that an
And
app?
It's an extension on your Chrome
On Chrome?
browser. So just Owl Factor extension, and it'll come up. And it takes 30 seconds to install, and it's easy. The other thing you can do on your phone is if you use the Chrome app on your phone when you're looking at news articles. So when you go to go off of Facebook, don't look through an article through Facebook, look through it through a browser, Chrome, and then just tap the video or the picture, the image. Hold your thumb to it, and menu will appear. And at the very bottom of the menu, it will say, search the history of this image or video. Click on that, press that, and it will give you a list. And if you go to the bottom, it will tell you the origin of the video or the picture. And if it's being used in the same context, you'll know that it's legit. And if it's being misused, you'll know that it's fake. So those are a couple of things. We at Loyalist, I go to high schools and I teach grade 11 and 12's digital media literacy. And we teach this kind of stuff to the kids all the time. Sadly, this direction, we don't get a lot of high school interest, but we've been doing it a lot to the west.
Do you talk to them about bullying online and things like that?
More than that, we talk about fake news, misinformation, disinformation, how to do almost the same thing that got said here by Catherine. A lot of the similar things. We go right into the schools and we teach that. We talk about news, how to spot fake news, and we talk about all of those good things. It goes for about 75 minutes.
So you're saying that it doesn't come on this part, meaning NDSS and things like that, there's nothing that's happening there, or?
Could you repeat that, please? I'm sorry.
You were saying that it's more in the west, from Belleville West?
Yeah, I was supposed to go down to Kingston, and it didn't quite work with the high school down there.
Okay.
But we've been trying, I send out an email to all of the schools, all the guidance counselors.
Yeah.
We have them all on a database. So I send out stuff, and it's called a fake news workshop, and we come in, we do it with faculty. We could do one session, and we have done sessions with teachers so that they can teach in their classrooms. And we also do one with the kids directly, and grade 11 and 12 is our target. The others are too young, and they get antsy really fast. So we just concentrate on those two grades. But
So no takers from NDSS or Sydenham or
No,
Hastings?
no, haven't heard a word from them, but we do it in a heartbeat. I can tell you, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Because I think this is the kind of digital literacy that's needed, right?
There was a question earlier on about Canadian versions of Snopes.
So the fact checkers from the Toronto Star.
Somebody was looking in pieces of paper here. Owl is one.
Owl Factor.
Fax can, it's an option, it's a small one, but it takes, you know, some of the major headlines and, you know, it'll have like a little bit of commentary on that.
Looking at the bigger kind of topic that we're talking about in terms of the idea of getting more female candidates, something that concerns me is whenever we see female premiers, we've had 13 of them and none of them have made it past re-election. And I think that's something that's really concerning. And I wonder if you had any comments about the role in social media in those. I think Kathleen Wynne had quite a takedown. I think Ontario Proud had a lot to do with that. But just wondered if you guys had any comments about that specifically.
That's really tough. You know, I think it's going to take many local conversations like this, as has already been alluded to, where we are really taking a stand and educating ourselves, and as has also been said, where we're making sure that we're developing and maintaining the human connection, the human relations that exist within our lives. You know, we have to revolt, I think, against these toxic forces that are out there, and be vigilant. And I think for, you know, one of the things that we've done within our party is we've worked out a system of mentoring women who are interested in being in politics. So that's another thing that, you know, I think that we need to do more of. But again, once they're there, we also need to support them as well, just to, you know, make sure that they're doing okay. It's not a great environment.
Why so scared?
Sorry?
Why so scared? Why is there such opposition? Why so scared?
Opposition for what
To
do you-
women being to different ideas, to progressive views, to sharing, to more equality. Why? Why so scared? Don't people
Sorry,
see the benefit? Sorry.
Are you talking about that demographic that I spoke of?
Yeah.
I feel that, you know, we have to take some responsibility in that regard. We did a lot of work to elevate marginalized groups, and at the same time, it wasn't that we took anything away from that demographic, but they might have been feeling that they were at the top of the heap anymore. On a subconscious level, I don't think that it was a conscious thing. I think that men in that group felt, you know, I'm not the top of the heap anymore, and this is concerning to me. It might not have been right up there at the forefront of their minds, but I think that it was there. I mean, I can't think of any other reason why that demographic would have changed so much. And the change is interesting as well. It speaks to what you're both talking about. You know, Premier Wynne got in with a majority. We had a lot of very progressive legislation in that time period. You know, things like free OSAP, things like 100,000 childcare spaces. All of those things to help families and individuals across the province in their daily lives. Government can be a force for good, and we believed that. I was in caucus. I know that we believed that government could be a force for good, and that we tried hard to make sure that marginalized groups in particular, were looked after. Why other groups, that particular demographic, would feel affronted in any way by that is probably a pretty profound psychological question that I'm not equipped to answer. And you know what, I felt this when I was there. I felt, okay, this is important, but what about, for example, single dads? lots of conversation about single moms. I am a single mom, I have been a single mom. I know what it feels like, I know there are more single moms. But what about a single dad who is even less prepared to advocate for himself, because it's not really very cool to be talking about being a single dad who might need some extra help? Or what about males who are sexually violated and assaulted? That's a group that, holy smokes, if you want to help a marginalized group, that's a group that really needs help. And, you know, there were lines in legislation that talked about that. Was it enough? Maybe not. You know, maybe we needed to go that extra mile to make sure that everybody, you know, and you can't be in government